Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SimplyTrade podcast. I'm your host, Anik. Today, I have a special guest, and her name is Renee Chuichiarelli. Hi, Renee, first of all.
Hi.
You've been on the podcast multiple times, talked on forced labor, talked on what's going on right now, talked on culture, trade compliance culture. You've touched on so many things, and that's how I knew I needed to get you back on this week, because there's an underlying problem here. There's been a lot going on in the news. We've seen a lot of changes. We've seen the China-US deal develop in the recent weeks. We've seen the stacking, unstacking tariffs. We've seen the de minimis. So there's a lot going on that people are talking about in the news and on LinkedIn. But it seems like a topic that is being neglected right now is forced labor. And thankfully, you're here to talk on this because you know a little bit, I'm saying this very lightly, a little bit about forced labor. And I want to say you didn't attend the CBP summit, but you listened, correct?
I went virtually, yes.
You went virtually. Okay. Yeah. So it's great that you can do that because it seems like you get enough out of it to still talk on it. So I wanted to touch, while, everything is currently talking about tariffs in the news, forced labor is definitely on the back end of things. You don't really hear about it. And it seems like people are sort of forgetting that forced labor even exists. And, we're doing trade and we're trading with China and we're taking care of tariffs. We're making sure, we're paying the whatever we're at now, 55%, 70, whatever you're paying. But there's no talk on forced labor whatsoever. What do you have to say on this, first of all?
Well, like you mentioned, I went to the cargo summit and security Trade and Security Summit. I think it's Trade Cargo Security. They changed the name. It used to say Trade Facilitation.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. Just quickly. So they changed the name. What is that all about?
Well, they changed the name. They pulled out some agenda topics. I think some of it might have been related to just the new administration, kind of having some input into this summit. There was definitely an error around, in my opinion, about just, the administration's goals. So that was significant in the summit. But they had multiple presentations on forced labor. Their first one on the breakout was forced labor. And they made it clear in the summit that they haven't forgotten about forced labor. It's not on the back burner. And they're actively enforcing, both tariffs and forced labor. So I'm glad you asked me to come on because I think that it's important, the trade community, while they're overwhelmed, right, that they still recognize that forced labor is going to be a significant enforcement with CBP. So, yeah.
I want to note that according to the International Labor Organization, there are currently 27.6 million people living under forced labor worldwide. So this is not just happening in China. And I think we have discussed that a while back, that this is not happening in China. But it seems like it's also not a distant problem because, it impacts all global supply chains, and it's definitely here in the United States as well. And while we're focusing on tariffs as of now, and we seem like that is our biggest kind of problem, as in money-wise, because we're paying much more and we're trying to figure out the best supply chain for us right now to make sure that we're not suffering, spending too much on these tariffs. But if you are audited for forced labor, that's a whole nother story about you losing money because the
products may not get imported. Yeah, if there's a withhold release order, which is basically CBP telling the ports, hey, detain this shipment. We believe there's evidence of forced labor, right, in this product, and then your shipment's detained, and then obviously you're missing delivery dates and maybe not even getting it imported, right?
Yeah. And let's talk about the numbers this year. Have you seen them?
I have. We're currently at 51 withhold release orders. That's pretty steady, actually. But as far as detainments, I look at the dashboard quite often. I'm going to recommend that everybody watches CBP forced labor dashboard. But currently, in January, there was 5,400 detained approximately. And now it's up to 9,400 just in April. So they've increased detainment significantly. So if you watch the dashboard, you'll see that. And I would recommend, going in there monthly, because also not only do you see detainment, numbers and projections, you also see what sectors they're focusing on. And I've noticed that it's generally at the top three are apparel, electronics, and aerospace, which is interesting. Aerospace in the beginning of forced labor was near the bottom of the sectors. They typically list 9 sectors, but aerospace has moved into front and center. So these 3 industries, electronics, aerospace, and apparel, kind of switch their places routinely.
So while, CBP obviously is also making sure they're, the tariffs are accurate and they're really enforcing that as well. Like it's, once the order is set, once they give us the set date, that's when it kicks in and people have to, navigate through their importers, navigate with their brokers, navigate with their lawyers, what they can possibly do. But do you do that with forced labor too? Let's say you change your supply chain, right? Because you're paying too much tariffs in one country. So right now it's probably most likely that you might change your supply chain because you need to get your goods from somewhere else. What do you do then with the forced labor process? Like you might not think about that instantly, but what if and you're saying, oh, perfect, like this will save us money. We're not paying the tariffs. This is a great way for us. How do you prep yourself then for, okay, wait, have we assessed the forced labor situation?
Yeah, it's something to consider, like you said, with all the tariff and executive orders and stacking. The trade community is considering tariff engineering, country of origin engineering. But while you consider country of origin engineering, like you said, you need to consider, is forced labor occurring in that country, right? And how does that impact your supply chain and your ability to import the product into the US? Because not only, do we have to worry about costs related to additional tariffs and stacking, we have to worry about detainment costs with forced labor, right? And obviously forced labor has a moral and ethical agenda to it, in my opinion. We talk about that in our course that we have coming up. We have a very detailed agenda, but we spend some time talking about the moral and ethical obligations of the trade community related to forced labor. Cost is always important, but I think there's a moral and ethical obligation, right, as well.
Yeah, but I always think, might play devil's advocate here, in business, money talks louder than morals. Yeah. Mostly. I'm sorry, that might not be all businesses, but you see it a lot, because money talks, I think. And so what can people expect? Like if they, do not comply or do not do their research and they, get mixed up in forced labor, what is the situation like?
We've said this before, but CBP is expecting the trade community or U.S. importers to know every raw material in their supply chain. Before forced labor has long been around for a long time, but it's just recently being enforced, right? Since 2022. But it has been a law that's been around for quite some time. But we used to buy, as an importer, you buy from a supplier. Boom. The country of origin, say, is Vietnam. You bring it in and you put country of origin Vietnam, good to go. Well, that's not how it works anymore, because now, where did those raw materials come from when prior to you buying the finished good? A good example is like tomato sauce. Tomatoes is one of the sectors in Xinjiang region where there's a region-wide withhold release order, right? And that's Northwest China, and they produce tomatoes. They grow tomatoes. So they sell those tomatoes to Italy, and then Italy, makes pasta sauce, and then a U.S. importer buys the pasta sauce and they put country of origin Italy. Well, that's not going to work anymore because now customs is like, hey, that's a sector we're scrutinizing, right? Because tomatoes are grown in Northwest region in China. So now Europe, you have an issue with forced labor because your raw materials came from a region, right, where forced labor is prevalent.
Wow. Wait, that's actually such a good example to think of.
Yeah, it's an easy example.
I mean, it's not a great, yeah, it's a great example, but it's not great for the people. You know, it's not easy to sell something nowadays. It seems like you want to do the right thing and then, you know, you're doing the right thing, but other people are not. And you have to go down the whole supply chain route. In that sense, so do you, at this moment in time, do you have someone specified to do forced labor or to do that kind of research? Who's doing the research for a company? Like you were talking about the training, right? Who should be taking that training then? Because I'm just thinking, should it be the whole company? Obviously, the whole company is not researching the supply chain. So who is designated to, you know, do that kind of job, and who needs to be kind of in knowledge of all this?
Absolutely your trade team, right? They're front and center for the regulations and enforcement, but you have sourcing or procurement, right? That there has to be a collaboration between, as you mentioned, Anik, maybe the whole company, but certainly procurement and sourcing and trade and legal are the main groups that need to understand this regulation. Because if you're trade and you say, hey, I'm buying where are we buying these tomatoes? You don't know. You need to go to your procurement and sourcing team. And then, maybe you have a separate costing team, right? So you need to get accounting involved. I worked at Raytheon and we had a separate pricing team, outside of our procurement and sourcing. So depending on how big your organization is, you may need to include 3 or 4 departments in this, to help with the collaboration and the decision making. And
I'm thinking I just want to kind of go back to the training real quick because it's so important. I thought about this when we thought about a topic that I wanted to discuss today. And, forced labor was like, yeah, we have not talked about this in so long. And it seems like it's totally off the table, but it's clearly not off the table. It's off the table for people, it seems, for companies, but it's not off the table for CBP. So unfortunately, it should be pretty equal in this sense. And I know the training is also a workshop that is hosted not only by you, but also 2 other people. Can you talk more about that? What will be done and what they can get out of it? And guys, I'm thinking about this. So you don't have time to do anything right now because you're taking care of tariffs. Okay. So then you get hit with forced labor. Well, you're done already. But let's think about this. You take 6 hours, right? Out of your day, out of your week, out of your whole year. And your understanding of what can happen, your understanding of what you should do, your understanding of how to prevent you getting audited for forced labor. And 6 hours is nothing in that sense. You're saving yourself millions of dollars for 6 hours. You can put tariffs on hold for 6 hours, I think. And at this point, probably not because it changes every single second. But I think forced labor is a steady thing, and I don't think the enforcements will get any less. I think it's going to get even worse, and you will be audited. If you have forced labor in your supply chain, you will be audited. So going back, tell me a little bit about the whole workshop before we wrap this up.
Sure. It might be a welcome change too, Anik, considering they're doing tariffs around the clock. Maybe taking a break from tariffs might be a welcome change for them. The course we have 3 instructors, myself, and then we have Eric Hargraves, who is he's a master in supply chain optimization and forced labor. And then we also have Sean Harwood, Eric Hargraves. Sean Harwood. He was a Department of Homeland Security attaché in China working on forced labor. But some of the topics we discover, history, like I said, moral and ethical obligations, technology and tools, CBP enforcement. And then to your point, we do a workshop on withhold release orders. So we give you a scenario and your container's being held for a certain withhold release order. And what documents do you need to provide Customs and Border Protection to maybe secure a release? So we do a workshop. Really awesome. So you're applying the concept that we're teaching you prior to the workshop. We've had some comments in previous courses that people have said to me, there isn't a training like this on the market. It's very, the application, process is really important.
I love that you said that. Like there isn't a product like this on the market. And I think that's where people have to take advantage. It's not to a high price. I understand. It's $5.95 for you to understand what's going on, how to deal with it, how to make it better, to apply what you learned. I'm sorry, that's a steal. But yeah, and thank you so much for talking on this. And I think people may have heard more about this at the CBP summit, but it seems like it goes one ear in, one ear out at this point, because you have too much information about tariffs in your brain. And right now, that's what the world or the United States kind of revolves around, I think. So I'm glad to have brought up this topic, got it out of the can, opened the can, and said, this needs to be out there, and we need to discuss, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of it. So I hope that you, as a listener, got something out of it, and it kind of, opened something in your brain, or like enlightened something and said, wait, we haven't even been checking that. So if you have any questions, please reach out to Renee. We can plug in her email down below. She can talk to you about, or you can reach out to me as well. Like, I can help you, probably not as much as Renee can, but I'm always open for discussion. And then the course you can find on globaltrainingcenter.com. It is on the menu. You can find it under forced labor. And there it is. It will happen August 6th, 2025. So you have about 3 months, 2 months, 2.5 months, 2 months and 5 days or something. And I have a few, just takeaways for them. There's an entity list that needs to be reviewed, and they've added, 37 entities in the last few months. And I recommended earlier, look at this UFLPA dashboard, and like you said, Anik, engage in our training. It's how you keep up to date. So important to just know what's going on with the enforcement. And you do that by looking at the dashboard and know how many entities they're adding. How many withhold release orders are they changing? What are the sectors that are being reviewed, right? So that's how you kind of stay up to date before our course. All right. Well, with that being said, we appreciate you for listening. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Interact with us on LinkedIn. Follow us on YouTube, or subscribe to us on YouTube. We post a lot of the videos on there. We also post a lot of snippets on all platforms, really. So you can keep up with all the good information. And with that being said, thank you so much, Renee, for being on and having all the good information for us and discussing this crucial topic that is not being talked about enough right now. And that is it for the news roundup this week. We will see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye. Have a great week.
Thank you very much for joining us. SimplyTrade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show, or would like to sponsor SimplyTrade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com simplytrade.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at SimplyTradePod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. SimplyTrade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by SimplyTrade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.